I'm good.
Welcome. We're going to be getting started. We've been streaming for a few minutes just so that we can make sure that the people out there in YouTube world, that you can find it, you feel good, but we also want to have the people here feeling good, and they're parking and making things work out as well. We're going to be getting started. You know what? I forgot about I had to mute that one part, but don't worry, everybody. It's all good now. So my name is Rachel Hedman. I am the executive director for Story Crossroads, and we are excited to be able to have this. Drum roll, please. Drum roll. And if you're at home right now, drum roll, you can do it wherever you are. So it is the 70th house concert. That is 70, everybody. Round of applause for that. Of course, the scout side of me wants to do this, but but 70. I remember the very first house concert. It was December of 2015. And Julie Barneson was the one who performed Victorian Ghost Stories. So that's how we kicked off. And then every storyteller is different and they bring something different. And wow, 70 times worth, and then continue on. Can you imagine when we get to the 3 digits, right? Yeah. So right now we are in the wonderful home of the Escalantes. I am so grateful that the home was opened up. Our host is even hosting even at this point and helping out. So I think we can still give applause to our host, to Deb especially. And we are also excited because not only do we have the 70th house concert, but we have just around the corner, and I'll tell more after we have the performance, we have our hybrid summit and festival. It's the 8th summit and festival. We're hybrid from now on. This is our 3rd year being hybrid, but 8th year just existing. And we have people that are coming outside of Utah and then great, wonderful tellers in Utah. And we have our youth tellers and everything else. We also have wonderful funders with the Utah Humanities, with the Utah Division of Arts Museums, with the Western States Arts Federation, with National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities. I mean, Zoo Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County. I mean, just a lot. So let's have a round of applause for sponsors or those who donated today and helped out or still will for this concert. Now, we need to know about a couple rules. One, if you have your devices, this is the time to turn them off, or you can put them on silent. We want to be able to be focused for this. If you're at home, I guess that's not so important, but you might want to, just so that you have a better experience. It's up to you. And then for those who are in person, there is the restroom that's down this hallway and to the right. You probably want to wait until after the performance if you can, but in emergency, there you are. We don't want to make sure that's all good. And also, we need to know about Karla Huntsman. Now, she has been performing for a long time. I don't know if you want me to say how many years. Do you want me to say?
I don't even know.
She doesn't even know. If that tells everybody. So we'll leave it at that. And she has taught storytelling. She has taught theater, and she plays instruments. You'll see a little bit of that today. And let's just give her a round of applause and have her take the stage.
Thanks so much. I honestly don't know how Rachel Hedman does what she does. House concerts, the summit, the festival. I just kind of bow to Rachel. I mean, honestly. And I have to say, this home we're in, this is Deb's Airbnb. It is gorgeous inside, and it looks out over the Salt Lake Valley. You can see the Capitol from it. I mean, it's just a glorious thing to be here tonight. And thank you so much for coming. This is just a wonderful thing to be able to share stories. The thing that's great about sharing stories is that when I share my stories, then you think about your stories, and it's a community experience. And I love that. So when I was pregnant with our first child, I was very, very excited. I was excited because this was our first child. And I was excited because I had been going to a birthing class, and our instructor had told us that the only reason a woman feels any kind of discomfort during the childbirthing experience is because she isn't breathing correctly. And I knew that I could be a champion breather. So I was expecting to go through the whole experience with no discomfort. We practiced. Gary and I went to those childbirthing classes. It was great. The happy day came October 2nd, 1978. I felt a little bit of twinge. So I picked up my little pink case and I said, Gary, it's time to go. So we went to the hospital in Mesa, Arizona, and they put me on a gurney. And Gary and the doctor proceeded to watch the football game that was on the TV there, which I didn't mind because I was just going to pop this baby out and we would be on our way going home. So as I lay there, I suddenly felt a little bit of discomfort. I didn't understand this. I breathed, but after a little while, I felt a little bit more discomfort. I did my breathing. And after a little while, I said to the doctor who was looking at the football game, hey, I'm not supposed to be feeling any pain here. He looked at me, and with that look, I knew that what I had fervently, passionately thought to be true was not true at all. Now, don't ask me why I actually believed that. I can't imagine now that but I did. I fervently believed that. It wasn't the first time in my life that I have believed things that weren't true, but it was certainly one of the most dramatic. For example, when I was 12 years old, I started a diary. And in my diary, I wrote some selections such as this. I hate Jean. She hates me. We will never be friends. Or I wrote, my mother is so mean. She makes me do chores. Or I wrote, I am so skinny. I will never have any boyfriends. So Jean and I had a great relationship. My mother wasn't mean for making me do chores, and I did have boyfriends. But I look with compassion on that 12-year-old girl because I earnestly believed those things. As I look with compassion on this not 12-year-old girl, knowing that probably 10 years from now, I will realize that there were things that I believed at this age that weren't true. However, there are some things in my life that I have found to be absolutely true and have stood the test of time, and that I don't think I will change and find that they were untrue. And that's what I want to explore tonight in 4 stories. Personal, folktale, myth, pourquoi story. And I'm not going to tell you, okay, this is the moral of the story. I'm just going to let you see if that story has any meaning for you, like it does for me. The king and queen had not been able to have a child for a very, very long time. But finally, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. And the king was so excited that in his haste to write out the invitations for the christening, he forgot one very important person, a person that he should not have forgotten, his own sister. And he shouldn't have forgotten her because she was his sister, but he also shouldn't have forgotten her because she had gone into the dark arts. And she loved to put curses on people, and she loved to do mischief in the kingdom. So Princess Mackinaw, his sister, waited for her invitation. And when it did not come, she decided that she would go to the christening and she would pronounce a curse upon the princess. She dressed in her finest black gown. She joined the procession leading up to where the king was. The king greeted her warmly. He had not realized that he had not invited her officially, formally. She smiled at the king, then went further and came to the christening bowl. And she took a vial from underneath her clothing and she poured the vial contents into the christening bowl. Then she said in a very loud voice, "Light of body by my charms, light of spirit, do all harm. Only crush thy parents' heart." And she took 3 turns around and left the room. The people in the kingdom were startled and they didn't know what it meant. When the water was put on the baby's forehead for the christening, the baby began to laugh, a very unpleasant laugh. And the nurse felt the weight of the baby leaving her body. She grasped on tightly. But the complete nature of the curse was not known until later on that day. The nurse was holding the baby and she was kind of jiggling her, and she jiggled her a little hard, and the baby began floating up to the ceiling. The nurse went to get the king. He got a ladder, he got a pair of tongs, and he was able to pull the baby down by her bedclothes. And they found that her body had no gravity. She was as light as a feather. They had to watch her very carefully, especially when she was outside. They had attendants hold down her skirts so that she wouldn't fly up in the air. But the thing that really concerned them was that she was light in spirit. She had no empathetic feelings, no feelings for anyone, no matter what people were going through. She laughed. She didn't care. The parents were very concerned with this state of affairs, but they didn't know what to do. When the mother cried over her daughter, the daughter would just say, "Oh, look at the funny faces mommy makes. Look at those tears coming down her eyes." And when her father would try to discipline her with a touch of her foot, she'd go flying away from him. So they didn't know what to do. When the girl was 17, there was a big festival at the kingdom. And people were on boats all over the lake. The king and the queen and the princess and their attendants were in one big boat. And the chancellor's boat was right by theirs. And the princess decided that she wanted to go and look at all the decorations in the chancellor's boat. So she commanded her father to get me over to that boat. The king grabbed her by the waist and he attempted to jump from his boat to the chancellor's boat. And he did not make it. They both fell between the two boats into the water. And the king lost his grasp with the force of the water as they went down. When the king came up, the princess was nowhere to be seen, and he immediately commanded his attendants to go and find the princess. They searched for a while, but after a while, near the island, they heard the sound of tinkling, beautiful laughter. And when they looked, it was the princess who was diving and swimming like a dolphin. When they went to her, she was laughing in a way she had never laughed before. And she begged them to let her stay in the water that day, and they agreed that she could. When she came in that night, she slept peacefully upon her bed. The next day, she wanted to go swimming again, and the next, and the next, and the next. And they had no problem with that because she was a different person in the water than she was out of the water. The prince in the neighboring kingdom decided it was time to go and look for a wife. He had no interest in the cursed princess in the kingdom next door, But he had to go through that kingdom in order to get to all of the other kingdoms in the country. So he started on his way, and when he was crossing the princess's kingdom, he heard a sound behind the trees in the lake, and it sounded to him like somebody was drowning. So he rushed to the lake, he dove in, he grabbed this person in the lake, grabbed her and pushed her up on the bank, and she immediately began to fly up into the sky. Fortunately, there was a tree, and the princess grabbed hold of the branches, and then she began berating the prince. How dare you? How dare you? Oh dear, this must be the cursed princess. How dare you take me out of the water? Put me back in at once. How would you like me to put you back in? Well, you got me out. You put me back in. And so the prince took the princess, slung her over his shoulders, and jumped into the water. When they both came up from the water, the princess was laughing that beautiful, tinkling laughter. And she said to the prince, would you like to swim with me? Yes, I guess so. So they swam all that day. It was blissful. And at night, when it was time for the princess to go back home, she told him that they were to swim underneath her balcony. The castle was right on the lake. Swim underneath her balcony, give her a little push. She would float up into the sky. She would grab hold of the railings and she would go in, which she did. Oh. That night, he slept on a bed of leaves by the lake. And all that night, he just dreamt of this princess. She was beautiful. He hoped she'd come the next day. And she did. And they swam that day and the next and the next and the next and the next. One day, the princess looked at the level of water, and it looked to her like the water level was lowering in the lake. She put a mark on the side of the bank. And the next day, she saw indeed the water was lowering. The next day, even more, even more, even more. And then the whole kingdom knew that all the lakes, the ponds, the streams, the rivers were losing the water. No one knew what to do about this situation. And the princess could not stand the fact that she would not be able to swim in the water ever again if this kept happening. So she took to her bed. She had no use for the prince out of the water. She had no feeling for him, and she became very ill. The king sent out a decree. Who can help the princess? No one knew what was the matter. One day there were two boys who were walking along the dry bed of a river, and they saw a golden plaque with a little bit of water covering it. And when they looked at the writing on the plaque, they decided that they must go to the king and tell him what it said. The plaque said that for the water to return to the kingdom, a human life must be taken. The plaque needed to be removed and a human being's feet placed in the plaque. And as the water level covered that person's head, the water would return. Who would volunteer to do such a thing? Word leaked from the castle about what the plaque had said. And of course, the prince heard of what the plaque had said. And he went to the king. I will stand in the water. But I have one request, and that is that the princess be placed in a little boat and that she be beside me as I go under. The princess didn't care. She had no feeling for the prince out of the water. And the king reluctantly agreed. So the prince was taken to the place where the plaque was. The plaque was removed. He put his feet in the plaque. The princess was brought. Her boat was brought. She had some cheese and crackers and some other things to entertain her as he went under. And when he put his feet in the water, sure enough, the water started to cover his ankles, his legs, his knees, up to his waist, up to his chest. And when it reached his chin, the princess felt some feelings that she had never felt before. And when it reached his mouth, his nose started to cover his head. She panicked. She got herself out of the boat and she swam down, tugged violently to get his feet removed somehow, got him into the boat, rowed the boat to the edge of the palace where she called out for help. The attendants took the prince, put him in her own bed, and she stood right beside the prince until finally he awakened. When he opened his eyes, the princess fell to the floor, weeping, 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 tears of a lifetime, She had never shed tears in her life before. And the rains began to come down upon the lakes, the streams, filling the rivers. At last, when the princess stopped weeping, she tried to stand up, and she couldn't. The nurse said, "Well, I think the princess has found her gravity." And indeed, she had both body and spirit. She was not distressed in learning how to walk again because she could not even walk, because it was the prince who was to be her teacher, and because she could go in and out of the water and swim anytime she wished. Of course, after a while, the prince and the princess were betrothed. They became king and queen, and they ruled the kingdom wisely and well, learning from the lessons from life's experiences. As for Princess Mackinac, who you know, of course, was the one responsible for the water disappearing, when she saw the princess and the prince so happy, she had gone down into her cavern, placed a curse upon the water. She was so disgusted by this turn of events that she left the kingdom and was never heard of again. So that story has great meaning for me personally, but I'll let you discern if it has any kind of meaning for you. Story number 2. When I was 8 years old, we got our first TV. It was a big, bulky, black and white TV. It had those tubes in the back, which would also always blow out during the middle of our favorite shows, which were, of course, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, I Love Lucy, The Green Door, and especially for me, the Lawrence Welk Show. I loved when Lawrence Welk said, a wonderful, and I loved the bubbles above the orchestra, and I loved the Lennon sisters singing, but most of all, I loved it when Bobby took Barbara in his arms and they waltzed across the stage. I would get up from our green corduroy couch and I would do my dance steps in the living room, in the kitchen. It was glorious. It was magical to me. Dancing was just magical. So when I was 8, I decided I would marry a dancer when I grew up and got married. When I was 12 years old, I renewed my commitment. When I was 12, there was a woman in our neighborhood who thought we pubescent teenagers should learn some social graces, and the way to do this would be to learn social dancing. So she invited 8 boys and 8 girls to come to her basement and learn dancing. When I was 12, I was supremely uncomfortable and awkward in my body. I had big, brown, attractive, and I was about a foot shorter. Really uncomfortable. But Marge said, okay, Karla, you come out. Jimmy, you come out and you put your hand here and you put your other hand here, you put your hand here. And she turned on the music and then she taught us the steps. Forward, side, together, back, side, together. It was magical. I lost completely any awkwardness or uncomfortable feelings around the opposite sex and my own body. And I said, I am going to marry a dancer. So in high school, I went to all the dances, the pep club dances, the junior proms, the senior proms, the Sadie Hawkins dances, all the church dances every weekend. I was dancing every Friday and Saturday night, pretty much all through high school. The guys that I dated in high school were all very different, but they were all dancers. When I went to college, I continued to date different kinds of guys, but they were all dancers. It was a prerequisite. But none of them were right for me. They danced, but just wasn't right. My mother became very disgusted with me. What's the matter with this guy? Well, nothing. So I after I got my degree, I went to Idaho Falls High School and taught theater and debate for 4 years. Wanted me to date the gardener who helped her with her roses. She wanted me to marry the man who kissed her hand and called her, you sweet thing. And she wanted me to marry the guy who sang beautifully. But they just weren't right. So after 4 years, I decided I would go back for my master's degree. The first year I was back at Christmas time, I was in our church. I was in the hallway, and my ecclesiastical leader said to me, he saw me in the hallway and he said, I found the guy for you. He said, now he's going on a mission. I was 26. In my church, guys usually went on missions when they were 19. I said, no, not interested. He said, no, he's older. He's 23. Still said, not interested. So went back to school. At Easter time, I was passing through the hall and you read this, and he pulled from his pocket a letter. He said, you read this. So I read the letter. It was written so beautifully, and it showed so much depth of character. And I was really, really impressed. And they said, okay, now I want one letter. Write him one letter. I said, okay. So I wrote him. He wrote me back. I wrote him. He wrote me back. Wrote every week for a year and a half. I only had one little picture, senior year picture. 1978. And he called me up on the phone. He was home from Brazil. And he said, why don't I was teaching school again by that time. I was at Twin Falls High School. He said, why don't you take a bus from Twin Falls, come to Idaho Falls. We'll spend the weekend, and then I'll drive you back to Twin Falls on my way to school in Utah. So we arranged that. I met him at the bus stop, and I was immediately taken with his sense of humor. He was delightful. So we spent time with his family, with my family. He drove me a phone call day in January. He came to visit me in February, more phone calls. I visited him in March, and then we were married in April. So if you're counting, that's 3 dates, basically. But I had no qualms. I was so excited. We got an apartment in the basement of a family who lived upstairs. And in those days, we did, of course, not have cell phones. And I didn't talk to Gary all while he was at school. And so I had to wait till nighttime before I could talk to him. And one day we got a flyer placed on our outside door, and it said that there was going to be a dance at the church that Saturday. I was so excited. I could hardly wait until he got home. But finally, I heard his footsteps on the landing, and I opened that basement door and I go, Gary, there's a dance at the church on Saturday. I dance. I hate dancing. You hate dancing. Yeah, I said, what's the point? What's the point? You know those buildings you see that are imploded? There's rubble all over. I couldn't believe it. But then I discovered there were other things that you couldn't know about your mate from 3 dates. I discovered our first disagreement was watching TV while eating dinner at night. That's what he wanted to do. I thought that was completely uncouth, boorish. How could you watch TV while you're eating your dinner? Another thing was if we ever had a disagreement, he'd want to go into his cave. And I wanted to talk this thing out. And the other thing that was kind of more serious was that in his family of origin, he knew his parents loved him, but he never, ever, ever heard his parents say to him, I love you, ever. And they didn't express physical affection towards each other. He knew they loved him, and they did. But for me, that was like, how can you even live with somebody that doesn't I love you? And when the children started to come, we had differences on choosing. For example, I wanted those children to come home and do their homework immediately, and then do their chores. And then if there was any time left over, then they could play. Gary had a much more laid back approach. And tensions just exasperated between the two of them until, we finally we were thinking, did we just make the biggest mistake of our lives? And one day I was talking to a friend about this, and I was going on like this. And I was hacking my hand like, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And she said, the problem isn't him. And the problem isn't you. It's the dance you do together. Oh, those were bad words to say. No, but she said, no, it's the way you react to each other, the way you interact with each other. She said, now, what do you love about him? And I said, well, this and this and this. And she says, and about this, you do that to him. He's a much more laid back person. You got to calm down here. You be more gentle. If you do that, he's just gonna leave you. He's gonna fly away, So I tried to calm my voice and be more gentle. And I started to look at what we had. I looked at all the things that I loved about this man. And we started to take a step forward, a step to the side, and a step back, and forward and side. We've now been married 46 years. And I want to tell you that every night that we're both home, we watch a movie in front of the TV while we eat our dinner. If we have anything to discuss, we discuss it together. He doesn't go in his cave. I don't go like that. And he writes me love poetry. He tells me, I love you. And he takes my hand whenever we go anyplace. You may never find us on an official dance floor, although just recently he has been saying, well, maybe we should take some dancing lessons. So that could happen. But it doesn't matter at all. We have learned to dance together. And like Lawrence Welk said years ago, it is a wonderful. I really, really love that man. Is a fable. Fables are usually stories which have an animal character as the main character, but they are in human situations. And I love this one. It says a lot about those things that I have found to be true in life. King Bene was king of the polar bears. He was very well respected by all of the animals, by all of the bears. He was wise. He was good. King Bene was a phenomenon to the animals because every year he seemed to be getting bigger and stronger and more magnificent. The wolves who came down from the south would look at him and think that maybe he was protected by some divinity. But King Bene knew the source of his strength. It was that beautiful white fur coat that glistened in the sun without power, no strength. And he was coming out. He saw something strange. It was summer and some of the ice had melted in front of in the ice caves where he lived. And he saw something upon the water that he'd never seen. He saw a log that was carved out, and inside the log were two creatures that he had never seen. He came down closer to take a good look, and one of the creatures in this log raised a stick, pointed it directly at King Bene, and pulled back on his finger. There was a loud bang, and King Bene felt a sharp pain as he went down to the ice. It was quite a while before he woke up cold and in pain. He looked at his body and he could see that that beautiful fur coat was completely cut from his body, and in its place were only sores and cuts and blood. The gulls, his special friends, had been watching over him. They didn't know if he was alive. But when they saw him sit up, the queen of the gulls said to her followers, "He is cold. Let us take the softest feathers from underneath our wings, and let us place them upon the tiny hairs still left on King Bene's body." So they flew down and they placed all the feathers that underneath their wings, and they placed him upon his body. King Bene was grateful. He was no longer cold, but he had no power without his coat. How could he live with these feathers? His cave didn't come out much that summer. Came out for a little bit of food, but he stayed in his cave brooding. Towards wintertime, two of the polar bears from down south came to ask King Bene some questions, some advice, which they usually did. They hadn't seen King Bene for, a long time. And they came right outside his cave just as he was coming out. And when they saw him, they laughed and pointed. "Oh, our king has turned into a bird." King Bene turned and went into his cave, and they could hardly wait to go down south and tell all of the other animals and all of the polar bears what they had seen. So when they told them that King Bene was now covered with feathers, another animal said, "Well, we cannot have a king who does not look like us. What shall we do?" They thought. And finally, they decided that they would have a duel, a fight. They would take their greatest, strongest warrior who would fight King Bene, subdue him, and they would have a new king, because King Bene cannot rule unless he looks like us. So they sent word to King Bene that in 7 days there was to be this fight to the death. They left. King Bene was outside his cave. He said out loud, "How can I fight without my coat?" And the queen of the gulls heard him say this. And she flew down to him and she said, "The eagle has returned from the far country." And they said that they saw a white coat shining in the sun. It could be yours. Would you like my gulls to see? Oh, yes, I would. There is one thing. Gulls will have to have all of their feathers. They can't fly that far without all of them. We would have to remove the feathers from your body. King Bene said, yes, do it. So they gathered all the feathers from King Bene's body, and he was completely uncovered. Into his cave to wait the 7 days. They could, but it took the far country and more time to look through the cities and towns and try to find that fur coat, and they were too late. The animals came up from the south after the 7 days. Vanu had been chosen to be the warrior. Vanu had always wanted to be king. He had wanted to be king when King Bene was made king. He wanted that power. So when King Bene came out of his cave completely uncovered, then they really laughed and jeered. Vanu stood up to King Bene and said, this will be short work. When King Bene saw who had been chosen to fight him, he knew he must do something. Vanu did not have his subjects, conditions, their feelings, their hearts in mind. He would make life miserable. And so he took a step forward and he rose up to his full height. He drew back his arm and he struck Vanu to the side of his head. And Vanu toppled down to the ice. All of the bears, all of the animals saw this great strength and they bowed themselves to the ground. Then they heard a fluttering of wings, and all these gulls came in carrying this white fur of King Bene's. They placed it upon his body. But all the animals knew, and King Bene knew, that the source of his strength, his outer covering, the animals knew that the source of King Bene's great heart. Yeah, that story has great meaning for me in how we look at other people, how we are, how we feel about ourselves. But you may have an entirely different meaning. At the base of the mountain, this next story is a myth or a pourquoi story. It's kind of a mixture of both. And a pourquoi story is how something came to be, like why bear has a stumpy tail, or why there's a rainbow in the sky, or it answers in a creative way what happened or why something happened in a very creative way. And a myth, we know lots of myths about the stars in the sky. At the base of the mountain lived a little girl who was just 6 years old, and her mother. Her mother was ill. A lot of people in the village were ill because there was no water and little food. The girl looked up at the shelf one day and she saw a battered tin cup. And she remembered that when her father was alive, they had climbed up the mountain and there had been water up in the mountain. So she patted her mother's shoulder and determined that she would go up the mountain. It was a hard climb, but she finally heard the gurgling of water. And she looked up, and there at a ledge above her was some water dripping, small little drips of water. She held the tin cup up to the drips and waited and waited and waited until the cup was completely full. Then she put her hand over the cup and she started to go down the mountain. When she got halfway down the mountain, she saw a dog lying down on the path. The dog has its tongue hanging out, its little tail was down in the dust, and she saw that the dog was thirsty. So she took water and from the cup, and she put it in her hand, and she reached down, and the dog lapped from her hand. She poured more water. The dog lapped from her hand. And then she put her hand over the cup and watched as the dog went down the mountain. When she got to the base of the mountain, she saw a woman who was bent over, dressed in rags. And when the woman saw her and saw the cup, the woman took a very small cup from underneath her clothing, and she held it towards the girl. And the girl took her hand from the cup, and she looked at the cup, which was no longer tin, but was silver and was completely full. And she filled the tiny little cup of the woman, and the woman nodded her head and went on her way. The girl put her hand over the cup as she looked at the woman and wondered about the cup. And then she got to her own house with her own mother, and she lifted her mother's head with her arm, and she looked at that cup again. She gave the mother water, and then she put her hand over the cup. The cup had turned to gold. When her mother had drunk her fill and was completely full of water, she heard a knock at the door. And when she opened the door, she saw a man there she had never seen before, and he was dressed in rather strange clothing. And he said, "May I have a drink from your cup?" Of course. She looked at the cup again, and the cup had turned to diamonds. The man motioned her to come outside, and he took the cup, which was now full of water again, and he poured the water into the dry bed of a stream. Immediately, water started gushing from the stream. And he took that cup and he flung it up into the sky, where you can see it today as the Big Dipper. Many people, well, the North Star, is part of the Big Dipper. And many people think of the North Star as direction and hope for the world. And some people think of it as kindness in the world. In 2017, we were living in Las Vegas, and we were there where the largest mass shooting in the history of this country took place. Over 59 people were killed and 500 people were injured. And there were terrible stories coming out from the Mar-a-Lago Bay where it was. But along with those horrible stories were incredible stories of human kindness. People were saying, "Do you need a place to stay? Do you need a car? Do you need groceries? I'll be there, whatever you need." And it restored my faith and many other people's faith in the goodness of the people of this world. In this world of struggle, it is easy to grumble. There ain't love anymore. Wars and feuds and fighting and all that constant whining, it seems a steady roar. And where is the love? Where is the harmony? Where does the caring begin? When will the world be at peace with itself? When will the fighting end? Okay, now this is your part. So this side of the room, you're going to sing. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Let's pray. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. And your part is in. Give a little love, a little, open your heart. Give a little love, a little, open your heart. Give a little love, a little, open your heart. Here we go. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Give a little love, a little, open your heart. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Give a little love, a little, open your heart. Maybe the answer is not in what's around us. Maybe it is deep within. Maybe the peace that we seek from others is found in the way we live. And where is the love? Where is the harmony? Where does the caring begin? Maybe it starts in our own caring hearts and the love we feel within. Here we go. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Give a little love in your heart. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Give a little love, a little hope in your heart. One more time. Shine, shine, shine like the stars in the sky. Give a little love, a little hope in your heart. Give a little love, a little hope in your heart. Give a little love, a little in your heart. Give a little love, a little hope in your heart. So, thank you so much for coming tonight. And I hope that these stories have helped you to think of other stories that you can go and tell other people, or if they've just reminded you of events in your life or things that you believe is true. So thanks so much for coming. Now I see there's lots of goodies back there. And I think Rachel has another announcement.
So I've been watching this so I can watch the people who are here, so then I can watch what's going on here as well. So we do have, we've had at least 10 people that have been watching live streamed, and we know that people will be watching the recording later on too. So maybe get like applaud and say hi. Thank you for coming. Yeah. And thank all of you for coming. And we do have so much thanks to Karla for all those stories. In case you didn't know, I wanted her to perform this like a few months ago, but she's like, no, I want to premiere. I want to do this. And she's been doing this for many, many years, but still, let's give a round of applause to Karla. All right. Now, I'm actually going to share it with the people who are live streaming, but also right here. We actually have house concerts where you can come whether or not you donate. Though by donating, it does help Karla and it does help Story Crossroads. And so there'll be a QR code. There's one back there in case you're like, oh, yes, I definitely need to. And then also for those who are there, I'm going to share the screen and there'll be a QR code for that. And so make sure you do that. Now there is the perk of in person. So I apologize to you on YouTube. I'm looking at these yummy goodies. There's like fresh fruit and stuff. But if you have fresh fruit in your home, then you can feel like you're joining us. Or go to the grocery store right now, and you might need some strawberries or maybe some pineapple or some grapes, or, see what you can do. But here, I know you're excited for that. Again, great applause to Deborah. And I'm going to do that share screen. Let's do a rah, rah, rah. Okay, so ready to do a rah, rah, rah? Ready? Rah, rah, rah. All right. You have now been released, but as you go and be released and eat yummies, remember, there is the summit and festival. It is around the corner. It is a week from Monday. It is really close. It is hybrid. It doesn't matter where you are. You can do it, and you can view it until June 15th. We have for your household. We don't do individual. You just buy a ticket for your household through May 1st. Through May 1st. And I'm going to do a page for them. Okay. Through May 1st is the early bird. It is only household for a 4-day event, and you can view until June 15th. We also have until May 1st for field trips. They are $25. It does go up after May 1st. And then we also have homeschool. If you know people who homeschool, we have a special, it's only $5 for a homeschool group right now through May 1st. You'll notice that I did bundle the bookmarks on purpose. Now there's some that are loose and individual that are bundled because storytelling is meant to be shared. And if you could grab a bundle, then you can share it with your neighbors and friends. Because I know you'll be like, oh man, I need more. So please do that. And then there's also posters, anything that you can grab there would be great. So you're released. Go eat. Go eat. And after Summit and Festival, we'll have June 30th, the next house concert. June 30th. Woohoo. I'll keep this on a little bit for those streaming.